the tightest management regime in the country is that the fishers are being harassed. They're being harassed from woe to go in that process over and over again, and threatened with legal action or fines.
Yep. Hello, Mary Howard. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Dane.
That's good.
Surviving the dramas and traumas of a commercial fisher's life.
Yes, we have a media release which came out on the 1st of December. Reform hooking fishers results 1 year on. What are the results from the perspective of Wild Caught Fishers Coalition, Mary?
Nothing like the ministers, and I have to wonder whether it was released on a Saturday morning, so he was hoping that no one would notice that the media release was there in the first place.
Right. So we may as well go through this bit by bit to sort of give the... we'll go through what the minister believes has occurred, and then you can give us the actual results, and I'll give some results as well, like figures. So the New South Wales government's commercial fishing reforms have ensured viability and certainty for New South Wales fishers as the $16 million reform program commemorates 1 year. Viability and certainty. Is that the case?
Definitely not. And to make such a bold statement as they have ensured, which means that will happen, that is fact, it is incorrect. And we don't have a certainty of viability with a debt that's exorbitant. How can you claim that fishers are insured of any future?
So there's debt in the industry.
Definitely there's debt. And for a minister to say we've issued an estimated $80 million worth of new shares, and give a figure of the value of 80 million, people have had to shift assets. They've had to take cash or borrow to be able to purchase and buy their rights to re-establish their ability to fish and to catch a product that they once could catch under their access shares that they had. So it's a shifting of asset, whether that is in a process of borrowing or a process of having the cash asset and you've had to transfer it into shares to do exactly what you were doing before if you could get the shares or the quota that you needed. Many fishers haven't got that. So we're a long way from viability, and we're a long way from being insured of that viability with the debt that's currently in the industry.
And did they need this quota naturally, or was this as a result of the reform?
As a result of the reform, the intent of the reform was to bring in quota and to bring in days' work where quota wasn't appropriate. That was one of the intents of the reform. Apart from the intent to reduce inactive effort and assist active effort, which they activated inactive effort anyway.
Right. So continuing on, Minister for Primary Industries Niall Blair said the reforms are strengthening the commercial fishing industry, making sure there continues to be a steady supply of locally caught fresh fish.
Interesting. How can the minister make such a claim when across the state We have co-ops that are struggling to know whether they're going to be there in 6 months, struggling to manage the outputs that they have every day. There's no figures presented in the minister's media release. He's conveniently referring to fresh fish this time. He has no assurances that the next total catch that they have to report to ABARES will be anywhere near the last total catch because of what they have done to the industry.
Absolutely. Do you think maybe that statement there might have something to do with the millions they've just spent redeveloping the fish market site?
Oh,
you don't have to answer that, it's fine.
I really didn't think of it that way. So the reforms are strengthening the commercial fishing industry, making sure there continues to be a steady supply of locally caught fresh fish. How can he say that he's strengthened the industry when he went in on a quoted 1,060? He doesn't tell you how many fishes he's got today.
It's
and that's
touch over 700, isn't it?
Well, I'm reluctant to say how many because I don't believe it is that, and I didn't look in the share portfolio to see. But if he's more than half the industry, and he implies that there's going to be, plenty of fresh fish by more than halving the industry. Where is he getting his fish from? He's not going to get it from locals. One person's effort is one man's effort.
Yeah.
And the realisation that you take out 700 fishes, you've still only got of the remaining fishes their individual effort.
Yeah. And the other thing is that he doesn't account for is how much less productive the remaining fishes are because they've had to offload a lot of their effort that they used to have to maintain access in another fishery.
Oh, definitely. The minister's saying he's issued new shares, but all he's taken from their initial access and the shares that they've had to buy is just bringing their access back up. And it may be in a particular fishery because they can't afford to bring themselves back up into all the fisheries where they were covered and multi-endorsed and could go fishing. Fishers have sold and they didn't have the luxury of being able to say, no, I don't want to sell this if I can't buy that. And so they've been stuck with a sell and buy that they didn't necessarily succeed in. And so there's a whole new dilemma within the industry of how they're going to survive. And it's not resolved in 1 year. And because there's 2 stages to the reform, because there's a whole new process that's still to be resolved, that the socio-economic impact is now and will be ongoing for several years. And the minister has no idea when he entered this process of what that socio-economic impact would be because he didn't do the study before he started.
Yeah. And so, the next bit, as you've just touched on, 1 year on, this is a quote from the minister, 1 year on, we have issued an estimated $80 million worth of new shares. So there's no telling where he got that figure. It's probably just made up like every other figure he comes up with. Fishers are using their mobile phones to report their catches in real time. And we now have one of the tightest quota, maximum number of days fished or kilos caught, management regimes in the country. I love how he sees that as a good thing. Let's go back to the mobile phones. And I did this in the last video with Joe McLeod, which the full interview will be posted pretty soon. But because I've got this app and I'm part of DPI's database, I get all of these messages. And honestly, the amount of technical difficulties that have happened in the time, fishermen have their mobile phones and they're on their mobile phones, but the problem is DPI can't control this app. They have no idea what they're doing. You can't see it. Anyway, I've just got message after message after message. Planned outage so they can fix stuff, so you have to use an interim fishing activity report book. So you got to use this little book, then you got to, so it's backwards again.
If you haven't got that done properly, Dane, the inspector advises you that you will be reported, and the inspector, then you get a notice from the department. And so the minister's, the tightest management regime in the country is that the fishers are being harassed. They're being harassed from woe to go in that process, over and over again, and threatened with legal action or fines.
Yep.
And it's to the point where some of them would very much like to have the fine and go to court, because they need to challenge at court the process that's taking place, because it's unfair.
Yeah. So what he doesn't mention here, one of the tightest quota management regimes in the country, what he doesn't mention in this is that the amount of kilos or the amount of days in this regime, as he calls it, was made up of the activity, either days fished or kilos caught, by the active fishers in the industry, who were in the industry. A lot of them have left now because they can't handle it. And that effort, or that catch, was then redistributed equally across the entire fishery. Whether there were people who had bought shares before this system because they'd been part of the process all along, so they knew what was coming. They knew that this was how this was going to go down. So they've ended up buying all these shares, and they've ended up with the activity, the catch history of these fishers. And they are now in a very cozy position, and they now have a massive advantage over the rest of industry, and can use that advantage to make sure that the others can't keep up, and more shares will come on the market for them to buy.
If they're lucky.
No, not for them. I'm talking about the ones with the advantage.
Yes, but and it's not necessarily that the fisher who needs the shares is going to be able to buy the shares anyway, or afford to buy the shares anyway, or lease.
Well, if it's anything like the share trading system, they won't be able to. I mean, how many people were assured by their local Nationals MP or Liberal MP that no fisher would be left behind if they were to enter the government-controlled share trading scam, and they put their bids in and they were outbid. They were outgunned. They couldn't get the shares. They are now sitting in a position where they have 10 traps and then someone next to them has heaps of quota and can run 100 traps around them.
Exactly, and in that instance, because you're talking about the trapping process for crabs, they can bring quota from other regions and put it all into one region, and this has actually been occurring. The minister doesn't open up the argument or the debate about the sustainability issue that he has now created with mud crabs, especially for Wallace Lake, especially that region where the fishes are in number with mud crabs and traps, and people are just trapping it out. And they had access without quota to do that before the reform actually opened, because the minister took it upon himself on the say of a fisher to approve the process in place for trapping without quota. So sustainability is now a major issue, but it's all sweet according to the minister.
So next quote from the minister: finally, after more than 20 years, fishers don't have to go through another Christmas wondering what the future will look like and whether their small business will be slapped with more restrictive regulations. First point, after more than 20 years. Here's the first problem. Instead of managing this industry for today, the minister decided to carry on with what Minister Ian Causley came up with the bureaucrats more than 20 years ago. Same scheme. Sorry, back then there were thousands of fishermen. Today, there are very few left, with massive closures up and down the coast, and we import 87% of the seafood eaten in New South Wales. Different day, different landscape. You should have managed it better. That's the first point. Second point, fishers don't have to go through another Christmas wondering what the future will look like, because they know that they can't afford to pay their electricity bill anymore, because they can't make anywhere near the income that they were making before, because the minister made sure of that. And the third point I'll make before you put some points onto this, it took a few, probably 6 to 7 months for the minister, after these changes were introduced, for the minister to announce marine parks up and down the coast, forcing more fishers out of work and losing access. So is that not more restrictive regulations? Not sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, over to you, Mary.
Sorry about that. I just fix that so it doesn't happen again.
Better not.
It's a case of the minister under oath in a parliamentary inquiry informing the fishers that they weren't buying their jobs back.
Mm.
Now, if you've got to spend money from the date of inception, you've got to have spent money to buy shares to actually reactivate what you owned and was issued to you in perpetuity. You are buying your job back. Mm-hmm. Irrespective of the minister's view of the world, the view of the fisher is that I'm buying my job back, and that's exactly what they had to do if they wanted to continue to fish. In 2007, they were issued with shares in perpetuity and told to go out and invest. Minister after minister, and yet in 2007, finally the share process after 4 stages had been completed, and they went out and they invested. Now, if they have bank loans, those bank loans have to be still paid. their debts still have to be paid. So they have a choice. And that choice is nothing other than you have to go and borrow or use your own asset and go buy shares. There was no choice from the 1st of December a year ago. The case was don't work or spend money. So today, what they do earn, they are paying back a debt. Anyone who's borrowed has an extra debt to pay, alongside of their debts that they originally had, and not necessarily catching any more product than they were catching before, possibly catching less because of the way the reform has been set up. So it is unfair and unreasonable for a minister to put out a media release that implies that everything's going sweet, and to actually imply that they're going to get more species of fresher fish, fresher varieties of local seafood. Either the minister is in la la land, or his media person doesn't have the background to know and write according to what the reality is, or his department is leading him on a treat, because you cannot, from the number of people that I speak to, you cannot gloss over the impact that has occurred here. It is devastating to many of the fishers and will reveal itself as time goes by. So his next year, 1st of December media release will be very interesting if he manages to survive the election.
I'm going to have to add a point here. With the whole restrictive regulations thing, $1 million lost from the Wallace Lake blue swimmer crab fishery because of a restrictive regulation. One that is a redistribution of access from the commercial sector and therefore from the overall seafood consuming public over to the recreational sector. Why do I say that? Because the new regulations that require fishers to go from, you can no longer keep a blue swimmer crab at 6 centimetres, it now has to be 6.5 centimetres. Unless you're not a commercial fisher, then you can still catch them at 6 centimetres. So that has completely wiped out the Wallace Lake blue swimmer crab fishery. It has made life very difficult for the Wallace Lake blue swimmer crab fishery. If you want more info on that, watch my video with Pete Ragno, which was, it's on the page, you'll find it, or YouTube, you'll find it on YouTube. So that is another restrictive regulation that apparently wasn't going to happen. So mostly lies so far. We haven't seen a truth in this media release yet, have we, Mary?
It's frustrating, I can tell you that. But what they have ensured is apparently the size change has gone before the Recreational Fishing Committee. And, of course, they won't meet in time for any changes. So the recreational fishers will have access to that 6 centimetre size all summer. And
they won't say yes anyway.
The bias in that management decision and the sustainability issue in that management decision is serious. And you know, we have an environmental impact assessment process that during this whole reform is being abused completely. Even just the issuing of equity in their view in terms of ensuring that both active and inactive fishers receive the same allocation in quota and all days, pending what fishery they were in. They've contradicted the environmental impact assessment, whereby sustainability was being argued in the objective to remove latent effort.
Yeah.
Well, what actually have they done here? The removal of latent effort has been totally construed, and they've actually removed active effort in the process and made it a wealth issue by the shifting of the ability for the active fisher and passing that on to the inactive fisher. And you've then got where to from here in terms of the environmental impact assessments, both for the blue swimmer crab, both for the mud crab, and it gets on even further into the meshing and the hauling process. So we've got a whole new fishery, and this process is based on management plans. So when the shares were first issued in 2007, management plans were created for our fisheries. And in developing reform, the options of developing a new management plan or using the existing management plan made a lot of difference in terms of whether a fisher was compensated or not. This reform has gone ahead on an amended plan, and so it has denied many fishers any right to compensation, which is unfair. And they have lost their rights in the process unless it is demonstrated properly that this is in actual fact a new plan. It wasn't an amended plan at all. The practicalities of what they've done, and the minister's media release before we move on makes it very clear that they've issued an estimated 80 million's worth of new shares. And in doing so, they've shifted from existing access shares to those new shares a wealth. Unfair. And a new process. And in that, they've introduced the quota and the days worked. A new process. So instead of having an output with an input process, we've got an output process. I've got that the right way. And it's hard for people to understand that. And in legislation, that's actually denied the industry, those people who've lost out big time in their wealth and compensation. So, you know, we're glossing over so many things in the process.
So, all right, let's finish. We're
up to 20. Finally, more than 20 years. We're going into Christmas, and Mr. Blair said the reform program had given fishers choices and greater flexibility by introducing a tradable quota scheme to reduce red tape, and most importantly of all, in providing more certainty for fishers to grow their business. No, Minister, you've lost the plot.
When did you start running this show, Mary?
I just took it over.
It seems like that. All right, so greater flexibility. Sorry, but the flexibility's been removed. One fisher I know has had to sell one endorsement, one of his fisheries, to maintain access in another, and basically that fishery was an integral part of his overall business structure. Without that part of his business, he is now in a world of hurt because the other two fisheries are not producing for him at the moment because we have drought, we have all sorts of other things, which brings us to that the media not long ago talking about drought. Now, it'd be silly to say that drought does not cause hardship in fishing. We all know that. But what we also know is that fishermen historically have been able to deal with drought. They have made it through, and they have done so by making their businesses more flexible, by having different fisheries as part of their overall business structure. That has been destroyed here. Is that right?
Definitely. And I guess it was demonstrated in the court case in terms of the real impact of taking away the crab fisher's rights to the 3 ton of crab he was catching, and giving him, just an estimated 700 kilo, and that's it. And he has to go out now and re-establish his quota because of what he's been issued. And other fishers have got that quota who haven't been catching crabs, and so now they have 10 traps in the water or whatever, and they're trying to catch quota that he used to catch. And we have other fishers who've, during the course of the share trading, have put up and sold important components of their fishing activity to shore up other components just to stay fishing and pay their bills. But it doesn't protect them for that multi-endorsed system that they had previously that allowed them. So, it's unfair to say that it's fine for a fisher to work 65 days and thank you very much, and he's just lost the other 65 days that was his backup in another fishery, and he's lost another one because that was another backup, but he has to sell those to survive because of the debts that he's already got. This is what has been put in here that doesn't come out in writing. It's glossed over the real impacts of this reform. It is inappropriate for what's being released here to just put out that everything's sweet. We know that some fishers have done well, but prior to Christmas, this boots hundreds of fishers in the backside, treads on them, insults them.
So we just did a poll on Facebook, and the poll was comparing Eddie Obeid with Niall Blair as far as fisheries is concerned. So nothing that Eddie Obeid went to prison for. And just to clarify, the poll was not to say that Eddie Obeid was not a horrible, horrible minister. He was absolutely horrible as minister. He closed down 32 or 33, Mary?
It finished up at 32 is my understanding, and whether that's happened outside of his term, the increase, because there has been more since the initial closures. But I mean,
so he closed.
I mean, the politics. We continue to focus on the minister, but there's a cabinet behind those ministers, and we don't get to the cabinet. And the thing is that the recreational fishing only havens were thrown into the mix after the legislation for share management was to be introduced.
Yeah.
And so you lost hundreds of fishers in that process, plus considerable amount of access in those lakes and estuaries and rivers that were closed, which damages the commercial industry, even puts a greater damage on the industry in this process because of the number of fishers and the $20 million that was utilised from the recreational fishing fee to do that. You know, it flies in the face of acceptability when the industry's representative body, known as CFAC in that day, was dismissed because of its lobbying government and seen to be working hard for the commercial fishers. Yet in the same process, Obeid creates a system where the department collects a fee known as the recreational fee to fish, and it is a fee by law, and creates a trust that the recreational fishers have an input into how the money's spent. And this is lucrative to the government in terms of exceeding more than 12 million. and utilised against the industry, it becomes political. And this last exercise where the marine parks issue came to fall and the lockout process, very interesting how the recreational fishers presented an issue for the minister.
Definitely. And I mean, that was always going to be the case. But Eddie Obeid, he closed 32 estuaries to commercial fishing.
Appease recreational fishers and bring in a recreational fishing fee.
That's right.
It's this,
and compensated fishers when he removed them. Right. Now, horrible. It's absolutely horrible. He was a horrible minister, as I said. But Niall Blair has removed the access, and not only removed access from fishers, he's taken it and given it to someone else.
Oh, actually, exactly. And if in the process he's forced
them into
people
debt.
to go into debt or to use their asset. So sitting in that 80 million is hundreds of thousands of dollars of commercial fishers' assets that have had to be utilised that they already had. I mean, the fishery is only valued at 90 million before the process, and we've got we're very proud of the fact that we've got an $80 million worth of new shares. That's fishers' money.
Yep.
That's debt or shift of asset.
And this is...
They've got to get it back.
Yeah, and this is... Well, they're never going to get it back. I mean, this is the whole problem. How do you, as a business owner, how do you justify spending money to buy shares when you are never going to make the money back off those shares? Never.
If we take the information provided to us in the meetings chaired by Ian Cartwright, his information was that, well, no, we're creating a value to your shares, and he implied that the shares of the day didn't have any value. Well, fishers were trading and businesses were trading on the share trading market, and while there were some avenues of and areas where you were difficult because of the management of the fishery, to imply that you had absolutely no value at all, and that this process was giving you that value. And if we proceed into the new year with marine parks, you've just removed the value. If we look at what's happening in Pittwater at this point of time, where the Pittwater fishers are being asked to sign a code of practice to keep an MP happy. Mr Stokes, apparently, according to the department, is not very happy with the continuation of the commercial fishing in Pittwater. And so we're now appeasing by requesting the commercial fishers to sign a code of practice. We haven't cited any code of practice for the recreational fishers. We haven't cited a code of practice for charter fishers. Only the commercial.
Don't worry about recreational fishers and charter fishers. I haven't cited a code of practice for bloody politicians in Parliament. I'd love to see them sign one, because at the moment they'd be in contravention of them. Tomorrow there could be continual rain.
We could have floods. There's no end of issues. We could have a new government who then determines that, well, we'll create a few more closures, maybe a few more aquatic reserves even. It's just, until such time as they really do realise that every time they take a commercial fisher out of the equation, every time they close the access, they've taken from consumers a right as well. Commercial fishers do not have any security. They're without the consumer in the equation, without the consumer's rights in the equation. Niall Blair's certainty and viability is pie in the sky.
I'd like to see...
It has no validity at all.
No. I'd like to see some legislation introduced federally to stop these state politicians. Look at Daniel Andrews in Victoria. I mean, what a menace. He is an absolute menace to society. How can you come up with a plan on a recreational fishing show? And that's how these commercial fishers and seafood consumers found out. I mean,
that's funded by government.
Yeah,
or sponsored by government.
It is. It's sponsored by the state fisheries authority. It's beyond the pale. Honestly, it's just insane. What is happening in this country? What are we doing? And how do we allow it to continue? How is there no accountability for the actions of these politicians?
And honestly, Dane, there's just... I've been at it for probably 20 years, and the education of the general public is
a full-time job.
So hard. They don't go to the polling booth on the basis of whether I can get fresh fish, and that's how they have to be taught. We have to instill into the consumer who goes shopping that your rights have been stolen, and they're stolen by the political process of managing fisheries. And
that was, I mean, that's what the question of the week is. Do you believe that a government can use an election fisheries policy as a mandate? I believe no, because no one knows what the fisheries policy is. I mean, a mandate should be limited to a major election commitment, one that, if you take 2015 New South Wales election, it was the sale of the poles and wires. Everyone knew they were doing it. It was all over every news channel in the lead up to the election. Labor and Liberal were both going on about it in the lead up to the election. Clear mandate. If they got elected, which they did, and they did it. You can't use the fisheries reform being elected in 2015 to continue on with a reform like this because you have a mandate. They didn't have a mandate.
And I guess that in terms of Victoria's election, the Gippsland Lakes results was evidence of the fact that the region did not support
the seat of Gippsland. Actually railed against it.
That's
and
right.
It was a landslide against it.
But how does it help those fishers? And the only way it can help those fishers now is if the consumer comes out and the consumer makes it very clear that they're not very happy about. And it's the consumer. The politics of the whole process is the realisation of where we're at, and that's the advice given to us from places like the Ombudsman's Office, where we're being told that we have to fight politics with politics. Well, that being the case, we're left with no alternative to do that. And it's very clear that the recreational fishers' little move to have a recreational fishing authority is more politics. You can see what's coming out into the future. The Shooters and Fishers Party were proposing to bring up no more marine parks just prior to the closure of Parliament. As far as I have checked, they didn't get that aired in terms of the public, where you can view it publicly, and I haven't managed to look at Hansard. But these are points that clearly can become quite political over the next few months.
There's an election coming.
Yes, and where does that leave the commercial fisheries? Now, the minister's made a point about the inquiry, and the Labor Party saying that all they can come up with is an independent inquiry, and the minister's of the view that fishers are tired of inquiries. Well, from where I sit, there's an awful lot of fishers who feel that a royal commission is what is needed. Now, we don't have the numbers to influence at this point of time the current parliament, but an independent inquiry is what Labor has offered to go forward into the election.
What we're tired of is the likes of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party going and organising an inquiry that was a complete farce.
A sham.
Yeah.
A sham, I would call it.
Exactly.
And having sat in the chair across the desk from Mr. Brown, very disappointed and nothing but a sham. And he said it in his statements. This is what you call a quick and dirty process, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
He said it exactly how it was, and the need to be able to read the minutes of the Standing Committee number 5 is essential for people to understand just where that inquiry ended, because the majority submissions to that inquiry were not supportive of the reform at all. They were agreeing with the 10,000 signatures that the whole process needed to be paused. But the chair of the Standing Committee number 5, who was Mr. Brown, when motions were put to try and have some relief there and get some pause, he sided with the government. He wasn't the slightest bit interested in pausing that reform.
No.
He supported it.
Yeah. All right, we're going to have to leave it there, Mary. I think it's getting fairly long, this interview. So we'll leave it there, and we'll have plenty of other chances to talk about the reform, I'm sure. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dane. I hope that I've been fair to everyone and covered the issues as best as I can without getting into percentages and
I think
who's got access and who hasn't, because we do know that more can be said there.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I shall talk to you later.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and comment on my videos. If you would like to support commercial fishing media, you can do so at Patreon. $2 a month to show your support, $5 a month to show your support and get early access to content. Thanks again. I'll see you later.